My neighbor parked in my spot for 6 months. Everyone said, let it go. I spent 2 months quietly documenting everything. Then I made one phone call. The morning I finally made the call, Derek's truck was sitting in my spot like it always did. Like it owned the concrete, like the number painted in yellow meant nothing at all. I came downstairs, took the photo, logged the timestamp, and went back upstairs to make coffee. 212 photographs. 163 spreadsheet entries. 6 months of patience that everyone around me had called a waste of time. I dialed the number at 8:02 a.m. By 2:14 that afternoon, he owed $3,200, and he had no idea it was coming. Marcus Hale had never been the kind of man who made a fuss about things. That was something his mother used to say about him, and he'd taken it more as a compliment than a complaint. He kept his apartment spotless, paid his HOA dues on the first of every month, and made sure the recycling bins were pushed all the way back against the wall so nobody had to squeeze past them in the hallway. He was, by his own quiet estimation, a good neighbor. That estimation was tested for the first time on a Tuesday morning in early October. He'd come down from his unit on the 4th floor of Birchwood Commons, a mid-rise condominium building on the western edge of Nashville, Tennessee, where rolling hills gave way to the first creep of suburban sprawl. With his gym bag over his shoulder and exactly 22 minutes before he needed to be on the interstate, he pushed through the door to the underground parking deck, turned left at the second row, and stopped. Spot 114 was taken. It wasn't taken by a car he recognized. It was taken by a black Dodge Ram pickup truck, lifted 3 inches off the stock suspension with a University of Tennessee vanity plate and a bumper sticker that read, "If you can read this, you're too close." The truck sat in the center of the space with the casual arrogance of something that had never been told no. Marcus stood there for a moment. He looked at the number painted in yellow on the concrete, 114, and then at the small laminated card bolted to the wall above the spot, which also read 114, which also had his unit number on it, 4B. He pulled out his phone, took a photo for his own reference, checked the time, and then walked to the visitor lot on the surface level and drove to work 6 minutes late. He figured it was a one-time thing, a friend of someone in the building, a delivery situation that had gone sideways. People made mistakes. He came home that evening and the truck was still there. He left a note. He kept it pleasant, almost apologetic in tone, which he recognized even as he wrote it as a strange instinct, the reflex of someone who had learned early that conflict cost more than accommodation. He tucked the note under the wiper blade and went upstairs. The next morning, the note was gone, and the truck was still there. That was when Marcus introduced himself to the truck's owner. He'd asked around and learned quickly enough. The truck belonged to Derek Summers, Unit 2C, who had moved into Birchwood Commons 4 months prior and had apparently treated the transition as an opportunity to renegotiate every unspoken rule the building operated by. Derek was the kind of man who filled a room without being invited into it. Broad-shouldered, loud-laughing, with the particular confidence of someone who had never suffered a consequence he didn't have a personal relationship with. He worked in commercial real estate, he told Marcus, within 45 seconds of their meeting, as if that explained something. "Oh, that Spot," Derek had said, leaning against the doorframe of his unit with a coffee mug in one hand, looking not at all like a man who had recently received a parking note. "Yeah, I figured since nobody was using it consistently, it was fair game." Marcus explained with remarkable patience that Spot 114 was assigned to his unit and had been for 3 years. Derek shrugged. "I'll move it when I get a chance. I've got a thing tonight." "I need it back today," Marcus said. "I'm working from home tomorrow, but I have an appointment in the morning." Derek looked at him for a moment. Not with malice, exactly. More with the expression of a man who had just been mildly inconvenienced by the presence of someone he did not fully register as an obstacle. "I'll see what I can do," he said, and closed the door. Marcus went back to his apartment, made dinner, and at 9 that evening walked down to the parking deck. The truck was still there. He found a spot in the visitor lot and told himself that tomorrow he'd escalate it. He'd call Greg Whitfield, the building's property manager, and handle it properly. He did call. Greg sounded sympathetic in the way that people sound sympathetic when they are already thinking about something else. He said he'd send a notice. He said it was technically a lease violation. He said things like, "We'll get it sorted," and "These things happen in transition periods." The truck did not move. Marcus spent the following week in a state of low-grade frustration that he recognized as foreign to his usual disposition. He was not by nature a person who stewed. He solved problems or he let them go, and he had never been particularly comfortable in the middle ground, the territory of pending grievances and deferred resolutions. But the parking situation had parked itself squarely in that middle ground, and there it sat, as immovable as the truck itself. He started the log on the 8th day. It wasn't a decision exactly, more of an instinct, the kind that comes from working in information technology for 15 years and developing a reflex for documentation that had long since stopped feeling like extra effort and had become simply how he processed the world. He opened a spreadsheet, labeled the first column date, the second time, the third spot status, and the fourth notes. He took the photo from his phone and attached it to the first row. There was something clarifying about it. Not satisfying, not yet, but clarifying. The frustration didn't diminish, but it found a container. He could see the problem laid out in rows and columns, each entry a small, precise record of a thing that was happening and being noticed and being kept track of. What Marcus didn't know yet, what he wouldn't fully understand for another 2 weeks, was that he was not alone. He was just the first one to start keeping records. The first time Marcus spoke to Nora Caldwell about more than the weather was a Friday afternoon in the second week of October, when he found her standing at the entrance to the parking deck with her arms crossed and an expression that suggested she had been wronged in a very specific and documentable way. She was 62, small-framed, with silver hair she kept pinned back and reading glasses perpetually pushed up on her forehead. She had lived in Unit 1A for 11 years, which made her, by the informal accounting that residents of any building maintain, one of the founding members of Birchwood Commons in its current form. She knew where the emergency shutoffs were. She knew which elevator ran slow on cold mornings. She knew that the vending machine on the second floor had not worked since March of 2021 and that Greg Whitfield had received exactly 14 maintenance requests about it. "He did it again," she said when Marcus approached. Marcus looked past her into the deck. Sure enough, Derek's truck was parked in 1A's spot, Nora's spot, alongside its usual residence in 114. He'd apparently started branching out. "When did this start?" Marcus asked. "Last week," Nora said. "I thought it was a mistake the first time. Then I thought maybe I was confused. You know how it is when you start doubting yourself because something seems too brazen to be intentional." She paused. "But no, it's intentional." They stood there for a moment in the particular silence of two people who have separately arrived at the same conclusion. "I've been logging it," Marcus said. "Every day. Times, photos, whether I could park in my spot or had to use visitor. I have a spreadsheet." Nora looked at him with something that was not quite surprise. "Of course you do," she said. "You're in IT. What's that got to do with it? You people document everything." He wasn't sure whether it was a compliment, but he decided to take it as one. He pulled out his phone and showed her the log, 23 entries across 18 days, with timestamps and photographs organized by date. Nora studied it with the focused attention of someone reviewing a legal brief. "I have photos too," she said, "but I didn't think to organize them. Can I send them to you?" "Please." That night, Marcus's inbox received 47 images from Nora Caldwell. They spanned a wider range of dates than his own documentation. some going back to Derek's first week in the building. 3 of them showed Derek's truck parked not in 114, but in a completely different spot, one that belonged to a resident on the 3rd floor named Phil, who had apparently never reported it because he traveled for work 4 days a week and had simply been telling himself it was a misunderstanding. Marcus organized everything into a shared folder. He was not sure yet what he would do with it, but he was beginning to understand the shape of what was happening. Derek wasn't disorganized or forgetful. He was running a quiet calculation, one that assumed the people around him would absorb the cost of his convenience rather than pay the social price of confronting it. He met Joel Pruitt the following Monday. Joel was 35, compact and energetic, with the slightly caffeinated demeanor of a man who took his home gym very seriously and made no apologies for it. He lived in 3D and worked in logistics, which meant, he explained, that he thought about the movement of things for a living. He had noticed Marcus documenting the parking situation from his window. "Is it just your spot?" Joel asked. They were in the hallway outside the mailroom, and Nora's, and apparently Phil's, though Phil doesn't seem to care. Joel pulled out his own phone. He had 8 photos. He'd started taking them only 4 days earlier, but had immediately recognized the pattern. "I don't have an assigned spot," he said. "I'm in the overflow tier. I just pay extra for a guaranteed space in any open spot, but there aren't supposed to be any vehicles double parked in the reserved section." He showed Marcus a photo of Derek's truck sitting in the driving lane, occupying enough space that 2 other residents had been blocked in for the better part of a morning. "I thought Greg handled it." "Greg said he'd send a notice," Marcus said. Joel's expression indicated that he found this answer insufficient. "Has anyone looked at the HOA bylaws?" Joel asked. Marcus had. That was the other spreadsheet, the one where he'd copied out every relevant provision from Birchwood Commons governing documents, cross-referenced with the parking addendum that every resident signed as part of their lease. The fines were in there. They were not small for a repeated violation, but they required documentation. They required a formal complaint. They required specifically photographic evidence submitted to the property management company. Not just Greg Whitfield, but the actual corporate entity, Cornerstone Property Solutions, whose regional office was headquartered downtown on 3rd Avenue. "I have documentation," Marcus said. "We have documentation," Nora said, appearing from the direction of the elevator with a manila folder under her arm that Marcus had not known she was compiling. Joel looked between the 2 of them. "How many photos?" 61, Marcus said. 61, Nora confirmed. Joel was quiet for a moment. "I want in," he said. That evening, Marcus sent an email to Cornerstone Property Solutions. He did not send it to Greg. He sent it to the Regional Compliance Department, whose email address he had found on the company's website after 17 minutes of careful navigation. He attached a document he had spent 3 hours preparing, a chronological log of every incident, with timestamps, photographs embedded at the relevant entries, the specific bylaw provisions that applied to each one, and a note at the bottom that 3 residents had now formally submitted the same complaint and were requesting action within 5 business days. He CC'd Nora and Joel. He did not sleep particularly well, but he slept better than he had in 3 weeks. He lay in the dark and thought about the shared folder, the way 61 photographs from a woman he'd known only by sight had arrived in his inbox that evening and arranged themselves in his mind into something coherent and consequential. He thought about the spreadsheet growing longer by the day. He thought about Derek Summers, 2 floors below, probably not thinking about any of it at all, and found in that asymmetry something that felt less like anger and more like resolve. The response from Cornerstone Property Solutions arrived in 2 business days. It was not, Marcus had to admit, what he had hoped for. It was a form email. It thanked him for raising his concern, confirmed that the matter had been forwarded to his building's property manager, and noted that all parking disputes were handled at the local level. It was signed by someone named K. Rourke, Administrative Services, and it contained no commitment to any specific action. Greg Whitfield called him the following day. Greg sounded less sympathetic this time and more like a man who had been copied on something he hadn't expected and wasn't pleased about it. "I've already spoken to Mr. Summers," Greg said. "When?" Marcus asked. A pause. "Earlier this week." "And?" "He indicated the situation would be resolved." Marcus looked at his laptop screen, where his parking log showed that Derek's truck had been in spot 114 for 7 consecutive days, without interruption, including that very morning. "It has not been resolved," Marcus said. Greg made a sound that was somewhere between a sigh and a clearing of the throat. "These things take time, Marcus. I'd appreciate it if you'd give the process a chance to work before escalating to corporate." "I escalated to corporate because the process wasn't working." Another pause. "I understand your frustration. I'll follow up with Mr. Summers again." Marcus thanked him and hung up. He sat for a moment looking at the wall of his apartment, which was very clean and very white, and offered no particular counsel. Then he opened the shared folder, added a note to the log time-stamped that afternoon, and went back to work. That was the beginning of what Marcus would later think of as the long patience. November arrived. The Tennessee hills went amber and gold, and then brown and bare. The mornings turned cold in the way that Nashville mornings do. Not the cutting cold of the upper Midwest, but a damp, low-hanging chill that made everything feel slightly heavier than it should. Marcus wore a heavier jacket and added an entry to his log every morning he came down to find his spot occupied, which was most of them. Nora brought him a casserole at some point in early November. She left it outside his door with a note that said, "Keeping your energy up. We're going to win this." He reheated it for dinner and found it excellent, some kind of chicken and wild rice situation, and thought about the specific grammar of that sentence. "We're going to win this." The "we" had expanded, quietly, to include a 4th resident. Beth Larson lived in 2B and had been at Birchwood Commons for 6 years. She was 41, soft-spoken, with the patient precision of someone who had worked in document management before transitioning into remote paralegal work. She had learned about the parking situation from Nora, who had mentioned it with the casualness of someone spreading very important information through a channel that looked like small talk. Beth had not had a direct conflict with Derek Summers. Her spot was in a different section of the deck, but she had something that turned out to be more useful than photographs. She had a file, not a metaphorical file, an actual manila folder stored in a banker's box in her second bedroom, containing documentation she had gathered over 4 years of quiet attention to Birchwood Commons institutional history. Board meeting minutes, correspondence between previous residents and Cornerstone, a legal opinion letter from 2019 commissioned by the then HOA board after a different parking dispute that clarified in very specific terms the fee structure for repeated violations and the timeline under which those fees accrued automatically once a formal written complaint had been submitted to corporate. "The key," Beth said, the first evening the 4 of them sat down together in Nora's living room, which smelled of the same casserole recipe and had the organized warmth of a home that had been lived in thoughtfully for over a decade. "Is the submission date. Once you file a formal complaint at the corporate level and they acknowledge receipt, the clock starts. 30 days after that, if the violation continues, the fines accrue daily. They're automatic. They don't require Greg to do anything." "How much per day?" Joel asked. Beth opened the folder to a specific page. "For repeated unauthorized use of an assigned parking space in a restricted section, which is the formal language, it's $110 per incident. The bylaws define incident, as each calendar day the vehicle occupies the space without authorization. Marcus did the math quickly. He had submitted the formal email complaint to Cornerstone's Regional Compliance Department on October 28th. He had received an acknowledgement. Even the form email from K. Rourke counted, Beth confirmed, as it had contained a ticket number on October 30th. 30 days from October 30th was November 29th. After November 29th, if Derek's truck was still in spot 114, it would cost Derek Summers $110 per day. And Marcus had documentation for every day since October 12th, 17 days before the formal submission, which would be relevant for the calculation of total accrued violations once they escalated. "He doesn't know any of this," Joel said. "No," Beth said. "Should we tell him?" Nora asked. The four of them sat with that question for a moment. "No," Marcus said finally. "Not yet." It wasn't cruelty that motivated the decision, or at least Marcus told himself it wasn't. It was the recognition of a truth he'd been circling for weeks. Derek Summers had been given every opportunity to resolve this through basic courtesy. He'd been given a note. He'd been given a direct conversation. He'd had Greg Whitfield speak to him at least twice. At every point, he'd chosen to treat the situation as beneath his attention. The documentation wasn't a trap, it was a record. And records, in Marcus's experience, had a way of mattering enormously at the exact moment when you most needed them to. November 29th came and went. Derek's truck was in spot 114. Marcus opened a new column in his spreadsheet. He labeled it Day Post Trigger. He typed a 1 in the first row, saved the file, and closed the laptop. He sat for a moment in his quiet apartment, in the quiet building, in the quiet Nashville night, and felt something settle into place. The particular calm of a person who has done everything correctly and is now simply waiting for the mathematics of the situation to conclude themselves. It would not be long now. He had only to be patient, and patience, as it turned out, was the one thing he had in absolute abundance. The December morning Marcus made the call started the same way most of them had for the past 2 months. He came downstairs at 7:40 in the morning, gym bag over his shoulder, and found the black Dodge Ram sitting in spot 114 with the same untroubled certainty it always had. He took the daily photograph, added the timestamp to the log, and then, instead of walking to the visitor lot, he walked back upstairs and made coffee. He had 212 photographs. He had a spreadsheet with 163 entries. He had Beth's documentation of the bylaw provisions. He had Nora's early photographs, which established a pattern predating even his own records. He had Joel's photos of the blocked driving lane, which constituted a separate violation, a fire code issue that had its own penalty structure, one that Beth had identified in the 4th week of November. He also had now a total of 29 days since November 29th, each of which had seen Derek's truck occupying spot 114 without authorization. 29 multiplied by $110 was $3,190 in automatically accrued fines for the parking violation alone. He sat at his kitchen table and read back through the relevant bylaw provision one more time, then read the legal opinion letter Beth had scanned and added to the shared folder. He pulled up the Cornerstone Property Solutions website, navigated past the tenant portal, past the contact page, and found something he hadn't used before: the number for the Regional Compliance Office's direct line. He dialed it at 8:02 a.m. A woman answered. Her name was Angela Reeves, and her title, she said, was Regional Compliance Coordinator. She had a focused, professional manner that Marcus appreciated immediately, the manner of someone who dealt with problems not because she enjoyed conflict, but because she was very good at resolving it. Marcus introduced himself, gave his unit number and building address, and referenced his original ticket number from the October 30th acknowledgement. "I have your file," Angela said after a brief pause. He could hear keyboard clicks. "I see the initial complaint was submitted October 28th, acknowledged the 30th. I also have a note that your building manager followed up." "He did," Marcus said. "The vehicle has not moved." "Can you confirm the vehicle is currently in the unauthorized space?" "As of 7:40 this morning, yes. I have a photograph from today and documentation going back to October 12th. Another pause, longer this time, more clicking. "Mr. Hale, I want to make sure I understand your documentation. You have daily records from October 12th? October 12th through this morning, 163 entries, each with at least one photograph." A longer silence. "And you're aware of the fee accrual provision under Section 14C of the parking addendum?" "I am. I've also had that provision reviewed by someone with a legal background who confirmed the 30-day trigger period beginning with the acknowledgement date." The silence on the other end was not the silence of someone who was surprised, exactly. It was the silence of someone recalibrating the nature of the conversation they were having. "I'm going to need to pull this file and review the documentation," Angela said. "Can you send your complete log to our compliance inbox with your ticket number in the subject line? I can have it to you within the hour." "Thank you, Mr. Hale. I'll be in contact with you and with your building manager before end of business today." Marcus thanked her and hung up. He sat for a moment. Then he opened the shared folder, composed a careful email to the compliance inbox with the full document package attached, 193 pages of organized, time-stamped, cross-referenced documentation, and sent it at 8:21 a.m. He texted the group, "Done, waiting." Nora replied first, a single thumbs-up emoji, which Marcus found unexpectedly moving. The call from Greg Whitfield came at 2:14 that afternoon. Greg did not sound like a man who was following up on a routine matter. He sounded like a man who had spent the last several hours in an uncomfortable conversation with people above him in an organizational hierarchy. "Marcus," he said, "I want to let you know that Cornerstone is moving forward with formal enforcement proceedings against Mr. Summers." "What does that entail?" Marcus asked, though he already knew. "The accrued fines as of today, there are 29 days at the violation rate, plus the secondary fire code violation, come to $3,215. That amount will be billed to his unit account. He's also received a formal notice that continued violation will result in the vehicle being towed at his expense." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "He was notified this afternoon," Greg added. "By certified letter and also in person. He was not pleased. I imagine not. I want to apologize, Marcus, for how long this took. I should have escalated it sooner myself. I didn't handle it correctly." It was a genuine apology. Marcus accepted it as one. "I appreciate you saying that, Greg." He sent a message to the group the moment he hung up. The responses came in fast. Joel sending a string of celebration emojis, Beth responding with the composed satisfaction of someone who had known the outcome was coming because she had read every relevant document, and Nora calling him directly, which he answered. $3,215, she said. Her voice was warm and a little ragged in the way that voices get when relief meets something it's been carrying for a long time. All of it, Marcus confirmed. "He never thought we'd keep track," she said. "He thought we'd just keep absorbing it." "That's usually how it works," Marcus said, "until it doesn't." That evening, from his kitchen window, Marcus watched Derek Summers' truck pull out of the parking deck and turn left onto the main road. He couldn't see Derek's face from where he stood, but he didn't particularly need to. He poured himself a glass of water, stood at the window for a moment longer, and then went back to his desk to close a few of the browser tabs he'd had open since October. He texted the group one more time. "Spot 114 is ours again." The three responses came within 60 seconds of each other, and Marcus found, to his mild surprise, that he was smiling at his phone in the way you smile when something that has been wrong for a long time has finally simply been made right. December settled over Nashville with its particular brand of mild winter, days that couldn't quite commit to cold, nights that carried a fog rolling in off the Cumberland River, the city lights softening at the edges like something viewed through old glass. The holidays arrived at Birchwood Commons the way they always did. Wreaths on the lobby doors, a tree in the common area that someone from the building association had organized, and a general sense of people slowing down at the end of a long year. Spot 114 was empty every morning. Marcus noticed it in the way you notice the absence of a sound you'd grown so used to that you'd stopped hearing it consciously. The first morning after the enforcement letter went out, he came downstairs, turned the corner into the second row and stopped. His parking space was there. Just his parking space. He stood and looked at it for a long moment. The yellow number, the laminated card on the wall, the clean rectangle of concrete that had been his and only his for 3 years before Derek Summers had decided it was fair game. He drove to work that morning without needing the visitor lot for the first time in 53 days. He brought a bottle of wine to Nora's apartment on a Wednesday evening in mid-December. Joel came. Beth came. They sat in Nora's living room, which had acquired, in the course of the previous 2 months, the quality of a place where serious things had been decided, where documentation had been reviewed and strategies worked out, and 4 people who had not known each other particularly well had become, without quite intending to, a community. He paid it, Beth said, almost the moment they sat down. She'd received confirmation from Cornerstone through a channel Marcus wasn't certain he wanted to know about. Full amount, $3,215, settled in one payment. Joel let out a long breath. He could have avoided all of it on day 1. He could have avoided it on day 30, Nora said, or day 50, or any morning he chose to move the truck. Some people need the wall, Marcus said. He wasn't sure where the phrase came from. It wasn't something he'd heard before exactly, but it felt right in the way that certain things feel right when you've been thinking around them for a long time. They keep going until they find it. And then they're very surprised it's there, Nora said dryly. There was laughter, the kind that comes from the release of a tension you've held long enough that you'd forgotten what it was like not to carry it. They talked for a while about other things. Nora's daughter who was coming for the holidays, Joel's logistical dissatisfaction with the building's package delivery system, Beth's current caseload, which she described in general terms with the careful vagueness of professional discretion. They talked about the building, its rhythms, its small dramas, the elevator that ran slow on cold mornings. At some point, Nora said, "You know what the strangest part is? Before all this, I barely knew any of you. I've lived here 11 years. That's the thing about a building," Joel said. "Everyone's in their own box. Until something forces you out of it," Beth said. Marcus turned that over. It was an uncomfortable truth about how communities actually formed, not through proximity or goodwill or the shared amenities that property listings advertised, but through the experience of having to solve something together. The conflict had been real, and the cost had been real. 53 mornings of inconvenience, 2 months of careful documentation, the low-grade stress of a situation that everyone in authority kept telling him would resolve itself until it finally, formally, didn't. But the outcome was also real, and so was what had been built around it. In January, after the holidays, Marcus got an email from Greg Whitfield. It was brief and professional. The HOA board had amended the parking enforcement process at Cornerstone's recommendation, effective the first of the year. Going forward, formal violations would be logged at the corporate level from the date of first complaint, and the 30-day accrual trigger would be disclosed to residents explicitly at move-in. The change was listed in the amendment as the result of a resident-initiated compliance review. Marcus forwarded it to the group without comment. Joel wrote back, "Resident-initiated compliance review. We should get that on a business card." "Beth, I'd carry that card." Nora called him again. She did that. Called instead of texted, which Marcus had come to understand was her way of indicating that something mattered to her enough to use her voice. "They changed the rule," she said. "They changed the rule," Marcus confirmed. "Because of us. Because of us." She was quiet for a moment. He could hear the television on in her apartment, low and indistinct. "You know, when I was younger, I used to think that if you just kept your head down and handled things correctly, eventually someone in charge would notice and make it right. And then I got older and I realized that's not quite how it works. Someone has to make it right. Someone has to do the documenting and the escalating and the not giving up." She paused. "I'm glad it was us." "Me too," Marcus said. He sat at his desk after they hung up and looked out the window at the Nashville evening. The lights of the city softening in the winter fog, the Cumberland somewhere out in the dark, the hills beyond the sprawl that you couldn't see at night but knew were there. He thought about the spreadsheet with its 163 entries, now closed, its last row dated December 10th. He thought about 61 photographs forwarded in a single email from a woman he barely knew. He thought about a manila folder in a banker's box that had been waiting 4 years for a reason to be opened. He thought about Derek Summers, somewhere in his unit 2 floors below, and felt something that was not triumph exactly, but was adjacent to it. More like the satisfaction of a completed circuit, the feeling of a system doing what it was supposed to do when someone was willing to supply the patience and the effort to make it work. He opened a new document. Not a log this time. Not a spreadsheet, just a blank page. He titled it, "Things I Know About This Building Now." He started a list. It was a long list, and it grew longer over the following months, and it had nothing to do with parking violations or bylaw provisions or fee accrual schedules. It was a list of the kind of things you only learn about a place when you've had reason to pay close attention, when the ordinary fabric of daily life has been pulled up at a corner, and you've found underneath not the infrastructure you expected, but people. People who had photographs they hadn't organized yet, people who had files in bankers' boxes, people who were waiting like you for a reason to stop keeping their heads down. Spot 114 sat empty and undisputed in the parking deck of Birchwood Commons, and Marcus Hale, who had never been the kind of man who made a fuss about things, drove to work every morning without thinking about it at all, which was, he had come to understand, exactly the point.